My name is Philip, this is Empty Wallets, and today I'm going to teach you how to play BattleTech. Okay.
How do we get started?
So, playing BattleTech, to get started, you need a few things. First thing you need, probably need some battle mechs. You need mechs to play with, you need the rules, you can get the Total Warfare book, or you can just use rules online, and you need your record sheet, which is the most important thing, so you can actually play the game. You may also need at least 2d6. I recommend having a handful. You can also buy specialized dice that help you with the movement and things like that, and you can find those in the description below. So today we're gonna be talking about classic BattleTech, which has a lot of rules. Today I'm just gonna be giving a how to get started kind of rule set. I'm gonna leave a lot of the nitty-gritty rules out that you can look up as you play, but I'm gonna give you just enough so that you can get started and playing with your friends. So like I said, the first thing we're gonna need is our record sheets, which are these right here. And what these are all of the rules and weapons and movement abilities of your mech and where all of the armor is and how much stuff they have essentially. So in the top left, you have your mech data, which is gonna have the mech's name. It's gonna have its movement speed for walking, running, and jumping. It's gonna have its tonnage, so how much it weighs. And then it has all of the weapons that are equipped to it, where they're equipped to the mech and how much damage they do, stuff like that. You have your warrior data in the top center. That's gonna be your mech warrior's name. That's the pilot called mech warrior. And it's gonna have their gunnery skill and their piloting skill, which are very important for doing all your rolls and calculations later in the game. In the top right, you have your armor data. That's gonna show you how much armor you have on your mech and where. Very simple, very straightforward. It's a dot system, makes it very simple to keep track. Bottom left is your critical hit table. That is where everything is located on the mech. And if it's shot with a critical hit or something like that, it gives you the ability to cross it out so that you know it's no longer usable. Bottom right is the internal structure diagram, and that has the structural integrity of the mech beneath the armor. So if all the armor on the arm is gone, you start taking damage to the internal structure of the arm. And then just below that is your heat data. That's gonna tell you how much heat you have generated, how much you dissipate, and what punishments you may get or consequences you may get if you overheat your mech. And you can find those at places like Mordell.net, your local game store, Catalyst Game Labs. They're all over the place. Just Google the mech that you're working with and you'll find a record sheet for it. The other thing you need to play the game is the map. So that's the map sheet that we have here. We use the Catalyst Game Labs ones with hexes and levels on them so you don't have to have terrain. It's just a hexagonal map that indicates facing very well, which is very important in classic BattleTech. So to get started, you need to pick a list. Lists are calculated in BattleTech using a system called battle value, which is just a points-based system that evaluates how effective each mech is on the battlefield. You can find the values for your mechs on a website called masterunitlist.info. You can search them by name, or you can just go through the whole catalog of mechs they have available. So when you're planning to play your game, you just decide with your opponent what point value you want to play at. A very standard point value to play at is 5,500 points, but you can play less, you can play more. Just depends on how long you want to play for. So all the phases in the game are the initiative phase, the movement phase, the weapon attack phase, physical weapon attack phase, heat phase, and the end phase. So to start the game, both players do a roll-off of 2d6. This determines initiative. Whoever has the higher value wins initiative. In BattleTech, going second is advantageous because everything happens simultaneously. So if you win the roll-off, you go second. So once you've determined initiative, starting with the player who lost initiative, they will deploy their first mech. Deployment can happen in lots of different ways as long as both players agree to how. Me and my friends typically play with, you put the mech on the edge of the board and do their first movement. That's their deployment. So now we go into movement. Initiative has been completed. We've deployed onto the battlefield. We've determined that we are fighting just an all-out brawl. We're not no objectives, just trying to shoot each other. Starting again with the person who lost initiative, you will pick your first mech. You will do their movement. Movement is either walking, running, or jumping. You can find the data for the mech that you've chosen to activate in the top left on the mech data section of your record sheet. And if you choose to walk, you can walk either forward or backwards. If you choose to run, you can only run forwards. And if you choose to jump, you can jump in any direction, landing with any facing. Every time you move a mech forward or backwards is 1 movement point. Every time you change facing, that is 1 movement point. Anytime you go up or down a level of terrain, that's an additional movement point on top of moving. And anytime you walk into a tree line, light or heavy, it is 1 extra movement point for walking into light and 2 for walking into heavy. Whenever you activate a mech and move them, they get what's called an attacker movement modifier. If they walked, it's a +1. If they ran, it's +2. If they jumped, it's +3. What this indicates in the game is how much harder it is for you to shoot at an opponent because of how fast you're moving. I highly recommend that you get a set of these movement dice that you can find on Amazon in the link below. What these do is essentially all you have to look at is how many spaces you moved, and then you put the dice next to it. It's going to tell you what your attacker modifier is and your target modifier is, which helps you do all of your math for shooting later for you. So after both players have activated all of their mechs and done all of their movement, we move on to the weapon attack phase, which is the phase where we get to shoot all the big guns on our big mechs. The way the weapon attack phase works is the same as every other phase so far. Starting with the player that lost initiative, they're going to declare a mech to activate, they're going to declare their target, and they're going to declare what weapons they are shooting at that target with. In order to declare a target, you have to have line of sight. In order to have line of sight, you measure from the middle of your base to the middle of the opponent's base. If there's nothing obstructing the line, then they have clear line of sight. If there are trees obstructing the view, you have an obstructed line of sight. Light trees are worth 1 point of obstruction. Heavy trees are worth 2 points of obstruction. If the total of the obstructions between your mech and the target mech is 3 or greater, they are not visible and you do not have line of sight. You can also have mechs that are adjacent to level 1 hills. You still have line of sight on those mech, but that mech will get +1 cover if that hill is in between your mech and the target mech. If the target mech is halfway behind a hill, the targeted player gets to decide whether they are behind the hill or not behind the hill. For reference, every single mech on the board is considered 2 levels high. You'll see references on these hex sheets or on the terrain of terrain being level 1, level 2. Mechs can move up and down up to 2 levels of terrain. If they're standing behind a level 1 hill, they're still visible, but if they are directly behind a level 2 hill, they're considered not visible. After you've picked your target and determined that you had line of sight, you declare what weapons you want to fire with. Once you've done that, it's the other player's turn to activate a mech, pick their target, pick their weapons, and you'll do that back and forth until all players have declared all of their attacks for every single mech. Keep in mind that you can activate a mech and say, I will not be shooting with this mech, and that counts as an activation and puts the Otis back on the opponent to pick their next mech. Next is weapon resolution. This is where we need to determine what we need to roll in order to hit our target. In order to do that, we use a fun acronym called GATOR.
GATOR!
GATOR? I hardly know her. Sorry. GATOR stands for gunnery skill, attacker movement modifier, target movement modifier, other, and range. Starting with the G, we have gunnery skill. That is going to be under the mech warrior data and the top center of your record sheet. By default, all mech warriors are 4 gunnery skill, 5 piloting skill. You can pay extra battle value to make that better. Just make sure that you use the right calculator that you can find on master unit list to determine if you have the right cost on your mech. After you've determined your gunnery skill, you're gonna look at your attacker movement modifier. If you walked, it's a +1. If you ran, it's a +2. If you jumped, it's a +3. After the attacker movement modifier, you look at the target movement modifier. Target movement modifier, if we look at our little quick, it's got this big long list over here for you. But essentially, if they moved 0 to 2 hexes, they have a 0 modifier to your roll. If they've moved 3 to 4, they have +1. 5 to 6, +2, so on and so forth. Think of it like this. The farther you move on the map, the faster your mech is moving, since everything is happening on an equal time scale, and a faster target is harder to shoot than a slower target. If you don't have the reference sheet, it's on the attacker modifiers table, which is in the core rulebook or the rulebook that comes in this box. So the O in GATOR stands for other. Those are things like intermittent terrain, weapons damage, funny things like that. So back to our line of sight thing. If you're looking through some trees to shoot at your target, but it wasn't enough to block line of sight, it still adds a modifier to your hit roll. Let's say you're looking through between you and your target, there's one bunch of light trees, that is +1 to your roll. If it's through heavy trees, it's +2. That's why if you do light and heavy together, it's 3 and you can't see them. The other piece of intervening terrain, like we mentioned before, is hills. If your target is adjacent to a level 1 hill and you can still see them, as long as they're in the hex next to it and that hill is between you and your target, they get +1 to that roll as well. Next, we move on to the R, which is range. Range is gonna be on the mech data sheet depending on the weapon that you're using. So there is short range, medium range, and long range. Short range has no modifier because it means you're so close that it's gonna be impossible for you to mess this up. Medium range is a +2 to your roll, and long range is gonna be +4 to your roll. So those long shots are real hard to hit. After we've determined all of that, we add all of our modifiers together. So we add gunnery skill, attacker movement modifier, target movement modifier, any others, and range. And that gives us the number that we need to meet or beat in order to hit our target. So I'd roll 2d6 to determine what I get. Let's go ahead And we'll put a sentinel up here, and he's gonna shoot at this dragon who is standing inside of light woods. So the sentinel has what's called an Ultra AC5, which is just a ballistic weapon, and it's gonna shoot at the dragon who's hiding in light woods. So let's start from the top. His gunnery skill. I didn't pay extra for this sentinel, so he has a gunnery skill of 4. So we got 4. Look at attack and movement modifier. Let's say the sentinel didn't move this turn, so my attacker movement modifier, because I didn't move, is 0. Target movement modifier. That dragon walked, so he walked 3 hexes. So he's gonna have a +1 modifier, so we're now sitting at 5. Then we're gonna look at other. He's in intervening terrain, so he's in that tree, and it's a light woods, so the light woods counts as an extra 1. So we're now up to 6. And then we look at range. For the sake of argument, let's just say we're at medium range, so that adds +2 to the roll. So now I'm at an 8. So I need to roll 2d6 and meet or exceed 8 for that bullet or target or weapon to hit my target. So as long as I roll 2d6 and I got a 10, that means I hit. And then we would do damage resolution. So I shot this Ultra AC5 at the dragon, and we just determined that I hit him. So what we need to do now is determine the location that I hit him at and how much damage I'm doing. So what we do with that is we look at the hit location table. My mech is facing forward, and so he is firing in his forward arc, and the dragon is facing him directly, so I'm shooting into his forward arc. So when you look at the hit location table, it's gonna have 3 columns. It's gonna have left or right, it's gonna have center, and it's gonna have rear. So depending on where I'm hitting it, helps you determine on the hit location table where the target is hit. Now that I've determined I've hit, I roll 2d6 again to determine the hit location. I rolled,
You rolled snake eyes
I rolled snake eyes, which is no, this is perfect actually. So I just rolled snake eyes, which what that means, I look at the hit location table, which is in the rule book or on the handy sheet that comes in the armor box. And that is a center torso hit. So because I'm shooting at his front arc, he received the damage in the front arc, I went to the center column, I rolled snake eyes, which is on the hit location table, says a center torso critical. We've hit center torso, so I look on my record data sheet, I look at the top right, and it says, next to the AC5 under damage, it says 5. So I do 5 damage to the dragon's center torso. What the dragon player needs to do is take a pencil or a pen or expo marker, however you want to fill in the dots on the dragon, and fill in the armor dots, 5 of the armor dots, to indicate that they've taken 5 armor damage. And because I hit a critical, that means I get to roll a d6 2 times on the center torso section of his record sheet, which is the bottom left critical table. So he'll roll 1d6 to determine which table, top or bottom in the center torso that I'm hitting, and the second d6 determines what I've destroyed. So after I've determined where I'm hitting a critical hit at, I just need to cross out whatever I destroyed. If it's an engine hit, you add a dot to the engine hit section. For every engine hit that a mech receives, they add 5 additional heat to their mech every heat phase, which we'll talk about later. For gyro hits, your mech becomes more unstable because they're not gyroscopically stabilized anymore. And then if I destroyed a weapon or I cross out a weapon, that means that weapon can no longer be used in subsequent turns. It will still be allowed to use if I declared it this turn because everything's happening simultaneously. Imagine us shooting each other at the same time and we both hit each other. So his weapon still went off that turn, but in subsequent turns, that weapon can't be used. As I said earlier, the dragon player is gonna mark off 5 bubbles into the center torso of his record datasheet. If at any point you run out of armor in that top diagram to hit, that damage then transfers to inner structure, which is that smaller diagram below. And any time that you do damage to the inner structure, the opposing player gets to roll on the critical hit table. Anytime a damage is done to the internal structure, the attacking player gets to roll 2d6, and they get to look at the determining critical hits table to determine if they got a critical hit and how many. I'm glossing over a ton of stuff with the critical hits. If you have questions about it, there are sections in the rule that talk specifically on critical hits. So if you run into that scenario, anytime you're playing a game, if you don't know the rules, look it up real fast. The rules are simple enough and explained well in the rule book for you to just kind of figure out how it goes.
And for the purposes of this,
it's just getting the game started. So I'm not gonna go over all the rules on critical hits. I'm not gonna go over all the rules on piloting skill checks. If you get a critical hit and you cross something out, look it up really quick in the rulebook to see what happens to that mech. Otherwise, this video is gonna end up being like 4.5 hours long if I try to explain every rule that goes into playing a game of classic BattleTech.
So just look it up.
Just look it up. So there's if you get the big book, if you get this book, there's a big glossary in the back for keywords, and you can just look up any word you want and find the rules for it. It's way easy. If at any point the armor and internal structure on either the head or the center torso of a mech is fully depleted, that mech is considered destroyed and is no longer usable. If at any point a critical hit hits an ammo box, that ammo is considered to explode. That ammo will deal damage equal to the number of shots left in the ammo bin times its damage multiplier. So if I have an AC-5 with 10 rounds in the ammo box and it gets critical hit, it does 5 damage a pop times the number of ammo remaining, which is 50 damage. And then I apply that. Ammo hits basically are a guaranteed kill on a mech unless you've used all of your ammunition. Another popular weapon that you can use are missile weapons. There are long-range missiles and short-range missiles. LRMs and SRMs are considered cluster weapons. When you get a hit on a target, you need to determine how many of those missiles hit your target by rolling on the cluster hit table. You compare what type of missile launcher it is. If it's an LRM-10, you roll under the 10 column. If it's an SRM-5, you roll under the 5 column, so on and so forth, to determine how many of those missiles actually hit. For LRMs, you roll in packets of 5 damage. So let's say I have an LRM-10, I rolled on the cluster hit table, 8 of them hit. My first hit location, I'll roll a packet of 5 damage. So I roll a hit location, apply that 5 damage to that location, and there's 3 remaining missiles that haven't hit yet. I roll a second location for the remaining 3. So LRMs are always in packets of 5. SRMs are always packets of 1, so it's a single missile, where they usually have less missiles, and they do 2 damage apiece. So for every missile, you roll a little hit location and deal 2 damage. After a player has finished the attack resolution for one of their mechs, the opposing player will then pick one of their mechs, go through all of the declared weapons that they've declared, complete all the damage resolution, and both players will alternate doing that until all mechs have been completed and all weapons that were declared have been fired. If a weapon is declared to be fired, you will spend the ammo whether you shoot or not, or whether you hit or not, so make sure to mark off any ammo you use on weapons that use ammo. So after both players have done all of their damage resolution, all of that damage is applied simultaneously at the end of that phase. So if there are any resolutions from that, meaning a leg was destroyed, a mech was destroyed, a head was hit, you need to do all the resolutions for that. So if there's any ammo explosions, that's when that happens. If there's any piloting skill rolls that need to happen because a gyro was hit, you need to do that then. Now that we've finished the weapon attack phase, it's time to move on to the physical attack phase. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on the physical attacks because there's a lot of different ways to do physical attacks. Just keep in mind that you can club, you can hit with melee weapons, you can charge, you can do death from above, which is if you have jump jets, you can land on top of them. You can kick, you can punch. There are tables for all of those in the rulebook. They explain how you do each and every one of them, depending on which one you're choosing to do. I recommend if you want to get into the physical fights, go for it. Just look those rules up as you choose to do them. After the physical weapon attack phase, we go into the heat phase, which is arguably the most important phase in the game. Everything that your mech does generates heat. When you walk, you generate 1 heat. When you run, you generate 2 heat. When you jump, you generate 1 heat for every hex that you moved to a minimum of 3. So every time you jump, at least 3 heat applied. If you go 4 squares or more, it's 4 heat, then 5 is 5 heat, so on and so forth. Every single one of the weapons that you fire generates heat when you fire it. It's gonna be on that record data sheet next to it. It'll say HT. The number next to that is how much heat it generated every time it shot. So if you have 3 medium lasers and you shot all 3, they'll generate that number of heat 3 times. You're gonna add all your heat together and you're gonna add it to the heat data scale in the bottom right of your record sheet. You're then going to look at your heat sinks. So you're gonna dissipate some of that heat, which is good. Single heat sinks dissipate 1 heat per turn, and double heat sinks, naturally, deplete 2 heat per phase. You're then gonna look at the heat data section in the bottom right next to the scale and see if any effects apply to you based on what heat you're left at the end of all your heat calculations. If any of them say, on a 4-up shut down, or on a 3-up do this, X, you need to roll 2d6 to determine if that effect happens or not. If you shut down, your mech is then shut down. You need to do a piloting skill check immediately to see if you fall over, and then that mech cannot be activated again until the beginning of the next heat phase. Any other effects that apply on that heat section don't apply twice. So if it says movement -1, and then there's a second section higher up that says movement -2, they do not stack. You just take the highest value that you see on the scale. So after you've done the heat phase, we go into the end phase. The end phase is where we resolve anything that we have not already resolved. I've mentioned piloting skill checks a few times. There are conditions where you need to do piloting skill checks immediately, typically after receiving damage or if something explodes, you gotta do those right away, or getting hit in the head. In the end step, there is a table, and I forget the name of it. It is called the piloting skill roll table. Why would I forget that? That's gonna have a lot of the methods or reasons why you would need to take a piloting skill check and the modifiers you need to add to them. Piloting skill checks are essentially, you take your piloting skill plus any modifiers from that piloting skill roll thing. So in this example, My Sentinel shot the dragon, and let's say hypothetically I did 20 or more damage. I need to do a piloting skill roll for the dragon. The dragon takes his piloting skill, which in this instance we'll say is 5, and then he adds +1 because he received 20 or more damage this turn. He rolls 2d6, and as long as he beats the 6, or meets or beats the 6, his mech is fine. If he fails that piloting skill roll, he then falls over. We need to determine whether the pilot is conscious or not, so you need to do a consciousness roll, which is, there's a table with rules on that. You can read those if that happens. And then you can also determine whether you want to do fall damage on mechs or not. I recommend you first time through, don't worry about fall damage, don't worry about fall facing. It's just 2 more tables you have to roll on to determine what happens. Just know that at the beginning of every movement step, if your mech has fallen over, you can spend 2 movement points to try to stand back up. You need to do a piloting skill roll to see if you can stand back up. If you pass the piloting skill roll, your mech stands up, you're -2 movement points, but you can do a normal walk move with whatever remaining movement points you have left. If you fail the piloting skill check on a stand-up, you then have to stay on the ground for a full turn. After both players have resolved anything that needs to happen in the end step, piloting skill checks, heat, all that fun stuff, once that's done, the turn is over. You then go to the next turn and you roll another initiative roll. You'll then play initiative the same way you did last time, the losing player going first, the winning player going second, and then you just continue all of these phases over and over again until you have a declared winner.
What else?
That's it. For the basics, that's it. We've gone through all the phases. We've gone through all of the actions that you can take in every phase. If you have questions about them, like I said, reference your rule book. Leave a comment here if you don't know how anything goes. We can happily respond to it. But what we really wanted to do is just make sure that you can get started playing BattleTech. And just like the rest of us who've played this game, you learn as you go. If you have questions about the rules, look it up. It's gonna happen. The best part about BattleTech is that you can opt out of whatever rules you don't want, as long as both players agree. Me and my friends play with a certain set of rules that we've all agreed upon make the game the most fun for us. You can do that with your friends too. If you don't like the falling rule, you can just take it out. It doesn't really change the game that much. You can do whatever you want. And that's the joy of BattleTech that I get, is that we can make a rule set that makes the most sense and the most fun for us to enjoy the game. And that is a quick guide on how to play BattleTech. If you have any questions, feel free to join us in our Discord. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.